The Blue Line Voice. Blood, sand, and smoke.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Blue Line Voice, Blood, Sand, and Smoke podcast. I'm your host, Josh Weddell, and today we have a very special guest out of the state of Florida. And before I introduce him, I'm going to read down his long line of things that he has done throughout his career in law enforcement and what he's doing now outside of law enforcement. He's a retired law enforcement officer with over 40 years of service. He did patrol criminal investigations, and he was the director of Florida's Region 11 Criminal Justice Training Center, the Police Academy. He holds a master's degree in public administration and a bachelor's degree in management. He became nationally recognized authority on cult and occult-related crime investigation training law enforcement agencies across the country. In 1980, as a corrections officer at the Dade County Jail in Miami, he saw something that changed the course of his life. In 2011, he founded the Florida Bureau of Paranormal Investigation, also known as the FBPI, applying to the same methodical evidence-based techniques he used as a police officer. In 2016, he founded the Indian River Hauntings, LLC, running year-round historical ghost tours across Florida's Treasure Coast. He is the host of Paranormal Stakeout on radio, TV, on the X Zone Network. In 2024, he published Haunted in Indian River County with History Press. Without further ado, I want to introduce Larry Lawson. Larry, it's great to have you on the show.
Hey, Josh, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Sorry, I messed up the introduction a little bit, but we'll get through that.
No worries.
Maybe during editing, I'll take care of that. But anyway, I want to start off first. I think the most important question is, where did you grow up and what pulled you into law enforcement?
I actually grew up in Ohio. I was born in Southern California, but I grew up in Ohio. That's where I spent my youth, Toledo, Ohio in particular. My grandfather was in law enforcement. I had an uncle in law enforcement. My father spent a very brief time in law enforcement. So it was kind of in my blood. And I actually, it took me a few years to realize it when I was in college, but that was where fate was having me head to. So that's how I ended up in the business. Headed down to go to college in Miami in 1977. Never went back. But while down there is where I began my police career in the Dade County Jail with the Dade County. Now it's it's Miami-Dade now. But back then it was Dade County Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, essentially the county jail. That's where I got my start.
And you went throughout your career, you went from patrol to criminal investigations to running a police academy as a director. Can you walk us through that career and take your time?
Sure. Well, back then I was young. I was just when I applied to Dade County, I was 19 heading towards 20, really very young to be in law enforcement. And for a young green kid from Ohio, going to work in the Dade County Jail was the best thing for me. It taught me it introduced me to the law enforcement profession in a way that I was pretty closely supervised, taught me how to handle myself, taught me how to talk to people. So working in that jail, that first 3/4 of a year was a big help to me. Right after the May 80 riots in Miami, which I got to experience, was hired by the city of Delray Beach, where I went to the police academy. It's in southern Palm Beach County. And I spent some time there. I had an accident, which in a car chase, which broke my neck. But I did heal up from that, ended up moving up to the Treasure Coast area where I worked as a municipal officer, then spent a good portion of my time as an investigator for the state attorney's office, which is our prosecutor's office. That's what we call them down here. And also as a detective sergeant with a local county. And then in 1997? 1970, I can't even remember the dates now, 1997, 1998. I went to the police academy and spent 18 years there. First running just the police academy side of the house, then became the director and spent a good portion of my time as the director of the Law Enforcement Training Center, which is a police and corrections academy. Retired from that, from the state in 2013, then went back to work as a police officer and then detective for the little town of Fellsmere and stayed there until I fully retired in 2020.
It's a long lineage of history.
Well, I tell you what, it was a looking back, I wouldn't have done any other thing. My daughter has followed me in the business. She's now, I think she's close to 16, 17 years. She's a deputy sheriff for Clay County. Very, very proud of her. So I wouldn't have traded my career for anything. And I got to do so many different things, experienced so many different things. I just wouldn't change it for anything.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel the same about my career. Like it's looking back on it, I wouldn't change anything I did because I enjoyed my time doing what I did. And I actually miss it, which is odd to say.
Well, I do. It took me, I didn't think I would ever want to get rid of it. I mean, I stayed working regularly after I was 60. And then I realized, maybe I need to leave this to the younger folks due to some other physical issues that I had from my different accidents and getting banged up on the job. But so I wouldn't change it for anything, but it was tough for me to get out. Very, very tough for me to finally realize I had to call it.
I think what I miss the most is I miss the people. I miss the colleagues, and I also developed relationships with those on the street, right? People you dealt with all the time. And I still have friendships from the people that I met, handling incidences and whatnot. And we developed friendships just oddly enough. And those are the things and those connections that I do miss still. But we stay in touch. Yeah. And so you became recognized as a national authority on cult and occult related crime investigation, teaching law enforcement agencies across the country. How did you end up in that spot? And for the audience, for the audience, I guess most people know what cult and occult is, but I guess maybe give a little definition of what that is. And
well, the term cult basically defines a group that is headed up by an individual who has is basically very authoritarian. He teaches or he indoctrinates groups that people within his group to believe that he is the highest, most authority, a lot of times directly connected to God or a higher entity. And that's how he keeps folks in line, for lack of a better word. Cults tend to attract people that are looking for something in their lives that they can't get or they're missing, and they're looking for direction, they're looking for structure. And this individual who runs a cult can offer that. And we could go into for hours the different types of cults and how that works and how they keep people in control. But that's generally the basic description. The occult's a little bit different. That means the hidden, the secret, and cults can be occult-related. There's several people in history that have led occult-related cults, but that basically deals with the dark arts and that type of thing. And being down here in Florida, we deal with a lot of different types of religious beliefs down here, so that kind of helped. And how I got into this whole thing was my specialty in criminal investigations was crimes against children. And some of your listeners who are my age, maybe a little younger, remember the late 80s, early 90s, we had a spate of occult-related crimes. We had a number of large ritual child abuse cases. We had a large one in Stewart, Florida, that I was investigating. And you had children that were being abused by offenders that were using the trappings of the occult. A lot of folks back then thought that we had satanic groups all over the place. Not necessarily true. We probably had people that were using the trappings of the occult, the teachings of the occult, to scare the kids into being quiet, which they used to great effect. Because of the case I worked and the different cases that came afterwards that used those techniques, I began to study what they were about, and adding on to that the different types of what we call Afro-Caribbean cults that we had here in Florida, Santeria, Brujeria, Voodoo, that type of thing. I began to understand and worked many cases and was called in to consult a number of times on those cases. And to throw that into, we throw in the good old regular cults, such as the things like the everything from bikers, different kinds of offbeat religious and non-religious cults.
So I've done a lot of readings on bikers and whatnot. So the actual, like, when you mentioned it, it just juggled my memory. Like, so I don't want to mention any of the biker gang names, but So there was actually bikers that were involved in that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And once again, if you look at you mean into the occult end of it?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a big reason for that. And a lot of it goes back to the teachings of a guy named Anton LaVey. Do what thou will be the whole. No, I'm sorry, that was somebody else. But Anton LaVey taught that if it feels good, do it, essentially.
Mhm.
And it's if you want to do it, just get away with it. And it doesn't matter if it's good, bad, or evil. If you like it, do it. And that allowed a lot of people permission, if you will, in their own mind to, well, I can do whatever I want. Bikers could get into that. And there's a lot of trappings of biker gangs that are connected with the occult, as well as the Nazi regime, which there's a lot of connection. A lot of the folks that ran the Nazi party, shall we say, just to kind of be politically correct, were involved in the occult also. And some of their trappings also blended over, and it attracted folks that may have been interested in the biker culture.
So let's rewind back to 1980 when you're a corrections officer at Dade County. What was it that happened?
It's interesting because while I say I studied a lot of the occult and cult-related crimes as an investigator, it was that incident in 1980 that really began my interest in what else is out there. I was 20 years old. I hadn't been on the job 6 months, if that. I was working in the Dade County Jail in Miami, where I'd gone to school down there, and was sent up to the 4th floor of the Dade County Jail. Now, the Dade County's main jail at that time was 10 stories, so it was a pretty big operation. I got sent up to the 4th floor, which was the floor where folks that were on suicide watch were put, as well as had mental health issues were. And they were short, so what happened is the rookies would get sent up to the floors to fill in when they were shorthanded. So there I was on the 4th floor this night. I was sitting in the control booth, and those of you that have worked in corrections, this will sound familiar to you, but you're in the control booth. In front of you is a lobby, elevator, 3 wings of cells that you could see down to the end. At the end was a big locked gate, barred door, that led to the catwalk that went around the outside of the perimeter of the cell blocks. And we would go down the main cell blocks and check the inmates. And then officers would go on the catwalk and walk around the outside just to do our checks. Well, I'm sitting at the control booth, looking straight ahead at the middle cell block. And I see a tall, lanky figure in uniform, what appeared to be a uniform, walk right to left on the catwalk. Nothing wispy, nothing see-through, nothing that said anything other than LT's on the catwalk, got up there and hollered at the guys behind me. LT's on the catwalk, get out there. He's figuring he's coming up to check to see if we're sleeping out there, doing his checks. So they went out the back of the control booth. Now, put this in perspective, the only 2 ways you could get up there was the elevator that was right in front of me or the stairwell right behind the control booth that came up to the catwalk. So these guys went out the back door of the control booth. One went right, one went left. They went all the way around the catwalk, came back and said, Lawson, there's nobody out there. I'm telling you what I just saw. I wasn't sleepy. I saw, this place is haunted. Stuff like that happens all the time. There's no question what I saw. There was no mistaking it. I was daydreaming. I saw what I saw. So that was my first experience. It made me really kind of think about it. And of course, then, and once again, folks that have worked in jails or prisons that are watching this, you've all heard stories of stuff that goes on in jails, prisons. So the Dade County Jail was no different. So, back then, you didn't talk about this stuff too much. You saw it, maybe you talked to your zone partner or the guys you were working with, but that's where it ended. Because back then, you talked about it too much, you got sent for a psych review by your boss, right? It's different today. Guys in our business talk about it all the time, and it's become a little bit more acceptable. In fact, I love telling this story, if you don't mind. Honolulu, Hawaii had a whole series of videos they put out, official videos they put out, talking about the paranormal experiences their officers had on the job, in their precincts, on the streets. And that was on YouTube, but that's an example. Things have kind of evolved. We talk about this stuff a little bit more than we used to.
Yeah. Have a funny story. Working midnights, I think, and any law enforcement officer knowing working midnights, you sometimes you got to go hide just a little bit. And I made a stupid decision. Well, this is way back, right? So we flipped phones, and cell coverage wasn't the best, but the one spot in this municipality I was working at had the best cell phone coverage was in the cemetery. So
Okay.
I was like, well, I got to take a break, and I go up in the cemetery, and I'm sitting there, and that was the only place I could get really good cell phone coverage in that area of the town, and where I was at the time. And so I remember I'm sitting there, and all the lights are off in the car, and headlights are off, and I get this. You ever get that feeling like somebody's looking at you,
Oh
right?
yeah.
And I'm like, I'm in the middle of no man's land in a rural cemetery, and I'm like, there's, and I'm like a little nervous, but something staring at me. And I remember it wasn't paranormal. I turned the headlights on, and I am literally surrounded by deer staring at the car as I'm like, and like, but as soon as you turn the headlights on, all you saw was the green eyes, right? That was
Yeah,
the
yeah.
person. And you're like, and my heart just dropped. I said, that's it. I'm never going back to a cemetery again at night, only to patrol it. But so anyway, you and then you also, and while we're on the subject, you had the 1980 incident, and then 2010 you had an incident in St. Augustine, or a
Yeah,
family
it was.
member.
Yeah, that was an off-duty thing, and it's funny just to go back a little bit. People talk about we talk about our cop sense, our gut instinct. You feel like don't answer this call just then, or don't go into this house by yourself. Maybe don't stop this car. So we all have experiences, but a lot of times we just pass it off as ourselves, and many times it is. But yeah, the 2010 incident was a little bit different. I was actually the director of the police academy at the time. My oldest son, who was at the time turning 11, I think, wanted to go to St. Augustine because he'd seen one of those ghost hunter shows. And there was an incident in St. Augustine at the lighthouse. And I'm just about 3 hours south of St. Augustine. And they had an incident there that was on TV. It was the old ghost hunter show. And it showed a figure in the lighthouse. He wanted to go for his birthday. So I said, okay, fine. We went up there and we took this tour, say that's at the lighthouse, called the Dark of the Moon tour, and took the tour. He had a great time. He said, Dad, can we do it again? Well, we're not driving back to Vero, so why not? It was a 2-hour tour. So I bought tickets for a second tour. And the guide said, well, you guys just did this. I've got a smaller group this time. So I'll tell you what, I'm going to take everybody else to the lightkeeper's house. You can have the lighthouse to yourself for about an hour, if that's okay. Groovy. That's exactly what we'll do. So Ryan and I are sitting on the 4th floor of this lighthouse. Typical lighthouse, huge, thick walls. You hear the wind howling, but you don't hear people outside because it's just the big. Well, suddenly we hear, without question, wasn't our imagination, we hear little kids laughing. Now, there's a story that back in 1879, the lighthouse was being reconstructed, rebuilt. And the construction foreman had a couple of daughters that were killed in an accident with the tram they used to bring the supplies up from the water. And they were using it as a roller coaster, went into the water, and they died. Since then, they had been reputed to be haunting that lighthouse. Well, back to the present time, Ryan and I hear these kids laughing. As a cop, what's the first thing I'm thinking? They're piping in those voices to enhance the experience, if you will. Let's have some fun with the guests. So I start looking for wires and speakers, trying to figure out how they piped this kids laughing in there. There was nothing at all that could have done it. And I went all through that place. There was no wires. There were no speakers. There was nothing that explained what we heard. And we know what we heard. So it was at that point I'm thinking, and I'm combining what happened to me back in Dade County back in those early years. And as a detective, you've got this thing about you're wanting to solve the crime. You're wanting to answer the question. What happens after we leave this existence? What's on the other side is one of the biggest questions, one of the biggest mysteries of all mankind. So at that point, I'm figuring I'm gonna find out what the answer to this is, and that's how we created. I'd done some investigations and had been looking into this for a few years prior, but it was at that point I said I'm going to try and use my skill set as a detective, put that to work to try and figure out what this phenomenon is, what this mystery is. So that's what I've been doing ever since.
And that brings me to 2011 when you founded the Florida Bureau of Paranormal Investigation.
Yep. Yeah, that's when we kind of put it all together. And I had several cops on the team using their skill sets also, and we began to investigate. I had some teachers, I have some firefighters, and we just started investigating what this phenomenon was. From that point on, we've been doing it ever since.
You've said that paranormal investigation is like a police stakeout, so to say, right?
Well said. Yeah.
Yeah. You sit for hours, nothing happens, and then you get a few seconds of undeniable evidence, right?
Yeah, it's not like, and how I explain it to folks on my tours, for example, you watch TV or the movies and you see a police stakeout, and it is gut-wrenching excitement, adrenaline flow from the get-go. The truth of the matter is, with a stakeout, you know this as well as I do, you'll go for hours and get nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, paranormal investigations are no different. It's not like what you see on TV. You'll go hours and get nothing, and then suddenly you'll get 30 seconds, 10 seconds of something you can't explain. And that's what keeps your blood flowing.
A law enforcement investigator is trained to be skeptical, to challenge evidence and look for alternative explanations, follow the facts wherever they lead. How do you apply that same discipline to paranormal investigation?
Well, that's tough, because the problem with this field, if you will, is you really can't use the scientific method at all, because it's tough to repeat things. But you've got to take the skepticism, and when you're investigating, that bang on the wall may not be a ghost. It may be a rat that's running through there. That cold breeze that you suddenly get may not be a ghost, probably isn't. It may just be the air conditioner kicking on, especially if you're in Florida. So what we do is we collect the evidence. We try to keep a very, very systematic way of collecting the evidence. For example, during my investigations, I'm usually at the computer in front of we always set up a bunch of cameras, and I'm monitoring them. I'm writing stuff down. Whenever we get some evidence, we try to figure out what naturally could have happened. And we only really put it in as evidence when we cannot figure out why we heard that voice in the middle of nowhere, or what just happened, or why the door slammed shut when there's no breeze in the house. Then we collect that as evidence and we store it. I'm a big advocate of training and structure in the field, which is one of the things that oftentimes are lacking. And that's so that folks can share evidence. Great way to describe it is this. I'm an advocate of having this level of training, because up in your neck of the woods and down here in Vero Beach, Florida, if we have a homicide, we're basically going to investigate it the same way. There's going to be differences in laws. There's going to be differences in departmental procedures. There's even going to be differences in how the investigator, his demeanor during an interrogation or interview is. Everybody's a little bit different, but we all essentially investigate a homicide the same way. My goal is to get folks across the country to investigate this phenomenon the same way, so that if we have an event in Los Angeles and we have an event here and it's investigated essentially the same way, we can exchange the evidence and that it'll be legitimate because we've both collected it the same way. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So that's kind of where I'm really advocating in this field. It's tough, to get back to your original question. It's tough sometimes to equate this to what we did in law enforcement, because we got to have tangible evidence that we take to trial to convince a jury of our peers that somebody is guilty. It's not always that easy in this business, and I had a tough time early on. In fact, I got told by a friend of mine who happens to be a medium that I have a large pole stuck in part of my anatomy, because I cannot get away from being so strict. Well, what's happened over the years, my mind has opened up. A classic example are mediums. When I'd work a homicide, I would get calls from mediums saying the murder weapon's here, the body is there. It was never came to fruition. I come to not have any faith in mediums. Kept that for a long time. Then there were some incidents that occurred that were unmistakable, unexplainable, that came from folks with that gift. And I slowly began to have to open my mind to believe that maybe some people do have this gift. In fact, I'm convinced they do. But how do you equate that to law enforcement? How do you explain to a jury, well, this person saw it and you found the weapon there? Okay, officer, you planted it, didn't you? No, this is what happened. Oddly enough, that's becoming a little bit more accepted in law enforcement circles than it was when I first started. But what I'm getting at is that was very, very tough, Josh, for me to reconcile. How can I get this voice out of nowhere and actually believe it's tangible? That's the bridge I'm trying to build right now, because it happens. It happens. To say it doesn't happen is as silly as saying every bump you hear is a ghost. The truth is somewhere in the middle. There are things out there we cannot explain. I'm trying to figure out how to build that bridge so the things that we can't explain, we can find out what the answers are and legitimately bring it to a jury. Long answer to your question, but does that help?
No, absolutely. Absolutely. What is the most, I guess, compelling evidence you've personally collected that you just can't explain?
Okay. This is a long story I'm going to make very short. Don't worry.
All right.
We essentially investigated a building. It's funny because my daughter was on the job answering a burglary alarm late at night and went to this little business. It was an old house built in the 1920s that was now a business, and they'd had an alarm go off. Essentially, they found something in the middle of the floor that shouldn't have been there, but it's what set off the motion alarm. They saw something on the surveillance camera that they couldn't explain. Said, "Oh, they have stuff in there happening all the time." My daughter says, "You need to call my dad." And they did. And we took the team in there. We had absolutely nothing going on for the first little bit. And to make a long story very, very short, we started getting evidence on multiple pieces of equipment and methods that were telling us about a little girl that was in there that was about 5. Part of this information was from a medium, and it was being corroborated. And I had earphones on. I had earphones on with the medium, so nobody could hear the medium. They were, believe it or not, joining us via the internet. But the equipment was verifying what he was saying, even though nobody could hear what he was saying because I had the earphones on. And to make a long story short, this little kid, through this investigation, said she was a little girl named Belinda or Lindy. She was 5, and Uncle Oscar didn't mean to hurt her. Well, immediately that kicks in my background, because this kid's talking like dozens and dozens of child victims I had. So I immediately went into cop mode. We're videotaping this whole thing. And I started asking questions like, what happened next? What happened next? Well, Uncle Oscar didn't mean to. And she had a lot of uncles that would come over all the time, if you get that drift. And she's going on, didn't mean to. And I finally realized that it's not like I'm dealing with a kid that had been abused. So now I'm trying to narrow down the time and period, as we do with this kind of investigation. I said, well, do you like TV? No. Do you like radio? Yes. And I mentioned some modern songs. Do you like this musical artist? No. Do you like this musical artist? No. Well, do you like this radio show? No. I finally asked, do you like Amos and Andy? Yes. Okay. So now I've got a time frame, 30s, 40s, maybe. House was built in the 20s. We don't know. So we continue on. I talk more about Oscar. Finally, it ends. It ends kind of interestingly. Things just stopped. So next day I get with my daughter and I said, look, go back to the PD, find out if there's any record of a child that died tragically back in the day. And she came back and says, no, there's no records from back then, which is not surprising, especially that part of Florida back in those days. But she goes to the cemetery, talks to the superintendent out there, who then calls me and says, look, your daughter was out here chatting with me the other day, and she told me I needed to tell you about this family that came down. They were there to visit a tombstone or gravesite rather, of a relative. His name was Harold Fear. I remember the name because of Fear. I saw the tombstone because I went out to the cemetery to talk to this guy. And he said they got talking about children buried there. And the guy said, and he didn't get their name, unfortunately. I'm still trying to get that. We had a shirt-tail relative, and that's my term, but a kind of a extended relative down here. She was a little girl that died back here in 1939. Her name was Belinda, and she died tragically, and we don't really know how. And then they went to Belinda's gravesite. Now, remember, back 2 weeks prior to this, we got the voice. Lindy or Belinda was the name of this kid. This kid died when she was 5 in 1939, tragically, and I was at her gravesite. How did we get that information at the other location? Now, what's also interesting, through our investigation, we found out there was a guy named Oscar who died in 2017, I think, at age 100, lived less than a mile from the house. Maybe it's coincidence, but it sure is interesting.
Yeah, it is.
But essentially, we got all this information. We weren't expecting really anything. We got all this information about a little girl who died at the age of 5, and then we find her gravesite that wasn't even properly marked, had a little tiny grave. You could tell it was a pauper grave, little gravestone. You couldn't even do a rubbing on it. How does that happen? How does that happen? I'm either lying and making it up, or it occurred. It can only be one of two things. And my reputation means too much to me to make crap like that up.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
So that's the type of stuff that you talk about interesting. I believe that I possibly got information on assault homicide. Take that for what it's worth.
Yeah, absolutely. It is amazing. Are you still working on that or no?
Yeah, I'm trying to, but the people have not come back. The superintendent's changed hands, from what I understand, and I don't know who it was, but I knew they were from New York. That's the only thing that the guy got out of there from New York. He didn't remember their name or anything. Doing all kinds of backgrounds on Harold Fear, trying to find some relatives up there. So I'm still working on it. It's just one of those things that I keep thinking about because once again, 2 weeks earlier, we get this kid's name, the right age, and now we got a gravesite.
Yeah.
So
it's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Would that be the most, is that case one that is stuck with you doing the paranormal investigations, or is there another case that prominently sticks out more?
Well, there's several of them, nothing quite as explicit as that one, because I've got actual physicality here. I've got a name that I can connect to a grave now, and a group of people that out of nowhere gave the right name. So that's pretty specific. But yeah, I've had several things that have occurred. I mean, there was an old farm, the children's petting zoo, that was a farm that we found some old gravestones in, and we got some interesting information out of that. You'll like this one. We were investigating a prison. State prison was closing down. This is several years ago now, and we got invited to come out there and investigate it. So we're doing a daytime walkthrough of the place to kind of just get a layout of the old prison. It was a youthful offender prison, so it had cottages to put, because they were younger, like 18, 19-year-old convicts, and they were putting them like in a camp to rehabilitate them. But they did have one full lockdown on the premises, and we're walking through there, and we're looking at all the places. We got some interesting things out of there, things that we couldn't explain. But what really hit us was that and this is 3:00 in the afternoon. We're walking out of the lockdown. We're recording everything. We turn on our recorders all the time. And we didn't know it at the time until we listened to the audio tape later. But my son, Evan, was with me on this one as we're doing the walkthrough. And he says, it's a shame they're locked up in here in life, and they're still locked up in the afterlife. Listening to the tape later, and this is on my website if anybody's interested in listening to it. Earphones make it better, but you can still hear it. You hear Evan make the comment, shame they're locked up in life and they're still locked up in the afterlife. And then you hear a raspy male voice saying, hell, we ain't dead. Once again, I either dubbed the tape or it happened. It can only be one of the two things, because it's on the tape. It's on my website. There's another interesting one in the old school in Fellsmere. Little kid we got is Billy in there. We got him on tape one time saying, one of my team members said, Billy, is this the room you like to be in? And there were no kids in the building at the time. This is like 10 o'clock at night, 10 o'clock at night. And you hear a little boy say, yes, sir. That's on my website too. We either concocted it or it happened. That's my favorite line. It can only be one of the two things.
So you founded Indian River Hauntings in 2016. Ghost tours, paranormal events, historical walks. Tell us what it looks like. What are you doing with that, and how's it going?
Well, it's funny because what happened was, after I retired from the state, went out to Fellsmere. I was their detective for several years, and had worked part-time with them earlier in my career. And while I'm out there, people start finding out what my side gig is. And they're telling me all kinds of crazy things that happen in the city. So I bring my team out there, and to make a long story short, we had tons of things there we just could not explain at all. Next thing you know, folks are saying, hey, can you talk to our Rotary Club? Hey, can you do a tour for our Cub Scout pack type of thing? And I've came to realize that, like police work, you ever had this happen? You go to a burglary and you find a fingerprint, and the victim says, hey, well, run it through your scanner and tell us who it is almost right away.
Yeah.
No, this isn't TV. You don't solve the crime in 30 minutes. Well, this paranormal stuff's the same way. People just, they watch the TV shows and they think you've got answers right away. And I really wanted to show people what it was. And I love history. Here's the other big part of it, Josh. I love history. In fact, when I retired, I wanted to teach high school history until I realized what our poor teachers go through, and then I realized I was no longer cut out to handle kids that way. Age anyway. I love history, so I like talking about the history and the Treasure Coast and things that go on here, and it really goes hand in hand with some of the phenomenon. So I decided to just start doing some tours to give people an idea of how we did it. And folks wanted to come into like the Marsh Landing restaurant in Fellsmere and see what goes on in there. So I created Indian River Hauntings to do that. And I really, frankly, expected it to last a year before people got bored with it. I still have a full slate of people wanting to come back and hearing about the history and the hauntings of our area and the things that my team has found out, as well as some of the historical facts of our area here in Florida. I'll tell folks you're all across the country, people look at Florida. I love using this line on my tours. People look at Florida as sand, sun, and mouse ears. But Florida's got such cool history that really has a lot to do with the building of our country as a whole. And I love talking about it. So that's where Indian River Hauntings comes into play. And yes, it's going strong today. I've unfortunately had to take some time off because of some back surgery I had, but I'm getting people now saying, when are the tours going to start up again? Because folks just want to hear about it. And by talking about the paranormal experiences along with history, people are kind of getting a bit of both. And I enjoy talking about the history. In fact, you mentioned earlier, I wrote a book, Haunted Indian River County. A lot of it in there is history. And one of the biggest, most gratifying things I've got out of writing the book was people that have lived here their whole lives have said, I didn't know that happened here, or I didn't know about that, not about the ghost stuff, but the history. So it's kind of a hand in hand thing. And that's why I do it. I just enjoy discussing both topics.
That was my next question, was history, but you actually answered it for me, because that's part of your paranormal investigations, is not just the paranormal part, but also the history component. Yeah.
It goes hand in hand. In fact, one of the techniques that we use is I've got a member of our team, Trish, who does our backgrounds. We'll get an address, and we do a complete background of the property. And so that we know exactly what we're doing as part of our investigation, knowing what's going on there. A lot of folks in the paranormal community said, "Oh, you can't talk about or discuss or even look into stuff that's happened there before." And there's some truth to that, because you don't want to go in with preconceived ideas that a lady in white's in there. But what you do need to have is a clear understanding, a foundation of what the property is. So we do a background on every place that we go into, and we understand the history. And it helps to also understand the history of the area. Our area was huge in bootlegging back in Prohibition time, not only because of the swamps where people had stills and stuff, but also because of places like the Bahamas right off our coast. Bahamas was a British flag nation, so booze was legal there. So people from my neck of the woods would go across the Bahamas, buy British booze, rum in particular, smuggle it back in on the Treasure Coast, all the way up and down what we call our Indian River, and sneak it in under the revenuers. And there's some really cool stories that go with all of that too. That's part of American history.
Yeah, the bootlegging that's one of my favorite history topics. And upstate New York, so the Hudson River was a big component during Prohibition for bootlegging. And then Lake Ontario, Lake Erie were very big. All the actually lakes that border Canada, right? All the Great Lakes, with the rum runners, and they transporting the booze, getting the booze from Canada back into the United States, and the safe houses and all that stuff that came along with bootlegging. Boy, there is a lot of history, and it's crazy to think about it, but yeah, it's pretty cool. What is the most haunted location you've personally investigated on the Treasure Coast? I guess one that would make the hair stand up on your back and say, "Oh boy, this is a bad one," or a good one.
Yeah, it's definitely a perspective at that point, whether it's good or bad. There's a couple of spots that we've had some luck in, for lack of a better term. The old school in Fellsmere is probably the most continuously active spot. And I say active because haunted puts a certain connotation into it. And I'm of the firm belief is we don't know what the phenomenon is yet. And we haven't even really discussed that. there's a lot of reasons why people, why we experience this, and there's a lot of reasons why it might happen. So I use the term active instead of haunted. And the old school is one of them, simply because of the things that have happened in there. One of my the little boy's voice, Billy, was in that school. One of my favorite stories, in fact, the night that we got the voice of Billy, I had actually been doing a tour of a group of folks that night in Fellsmere. We were downstairs. We don't have a lot of basements in Florida, but the old school does have one. And I had some groups down there, a group down there, about 7 people on a tour. And when the tour was done, we were going to do our investigations. So my team had come in there and set up upstairs. I'm sitting in the basement with my guests, and we hear footsteps really loud come down the stairs to the basement, and we all heard the door rattle. In fact, myself and all our guests turned to look at the doors to see who was there, and there was nobody there. My first thought was, well, one of my teammates had come down to see if we were done or not. So I go to the door and look, there's nobody there. I said, well, okay, I guess the place is active tonight. Walk upstairs, and they're all gathered in an area near the elevators. Larry, you got to hear this. And that's when we heard the voice of Billy. The elevator has documented to go up and down. We've even got a recording of it, and banging. Somebody's hitting the door. I actually got a recording of that. And there has been, the city had called in engineers to look to see if there was something mechanical. Nothing there. The cleaning lady has a huge bunch of stories. One of the other interesting things from the cop angle is I was the detective there, and Letty, the cleaning lady, comes in real excited. It was the day after Memorial Day 2017, I think. And she's all excited. You got to come with me. You got to come with me. Nobody'd been in the old school, which is at this point City Hall. Nobody'd been in there all weekend, long weekend for Memorial Day. And she took me in there, and she showed me handprints, and they were kids' handprints on a glass partition going into the building department. Now, that's one thing that had happened there a lot. The folks in the basement who, at that point, it was the Boys and Girls Club, had talked about coming in and seeing kids' handprints all over the place. Their kids downstairs would be talking to kids and playing with kids that weren't there. I mean, they all had these stories. Well, anyway, Letty calls me, and she brings me over, and she shows me this kid's handprint on the glass. And she said, I was in here Saturday night. I cleaned these windows. There's nobody that's been here since. And there they are. And yes, I did try to lift them. And I could, they weren't quite good enough that I could get any good patterns on, but they were handprints on this window. So as far as active with kids and all kinds of crazy things, that old school in Fellsmere is tough to beat. There's a lot of other good ones, and I don't want to bore your audience too much with them, but that's probably the place that stands out the most.
Yeah. So 2024, you write the book Haunted Indian River County, and that came out in 2024 through History Press. Just hit on that a little bit. What is it about? And
it talks a little bit about why I wrote the book. It talks a lot about the history of the area. And what I do is I cover the county as a whole, the city of Vero Beach, the city of Fellsmere, and the city of Sebastian, and all the things that have gone on there, but including their history of when the towns were created. And you're from upstate New York. You have old buildings. You've got people still in houses that were built in the 1700s up in your neck of the woods. Florida is not that old. To us, 1900 is old, because of our history really didn't kick off, especially in this area. Think about it, until the 1880s. There's no real historical inhabitants of Northerners in this area actively building towns until the 1880s. Orlando's a little different. They've got into the 1850s, but this area is 1880s. So it talks a lot about that, and I shared that history along with what my team has come up with, as well as some of the historical legends that come out of the area. So it was fun to write, and I did it because I finally had to put down in writing just the stuff, the history, what's happened here. I really want people to understand what the Treasure Coast is and how that played a part in the growth of Florida. So that was my reasoning for getting it out there. And I'm now working on Haunted St. Lucie County, which is this county just south of us. Fort Pierce is the county seat, and that's got some crazy history as well as events too. So
yeah, I think we've hit on this a little bit, but This would correlate with your law enforcement background. What does a legitimate paranormal evidence, what does legitimate paranormal evidence actually look like? Walk us through how you collect it, preserve it, and verify it.
Sure. First of all, we're videotaping everything. So we've got a couple of things on video that we keep it, we collect it. I actually keep it in a locked vault, almost like we would an evidence room, and we check it in and we check it out so that it's always, the chain of custody is always there. And that's tough. That's tough with folks that are doing this that haven't got a police background. They can just put it out online and they think there it is. Well, we put some stuff out online, but the original evidence goes into a locked box type of thing, just like an evidence room. So we collect it. We start off our investigation doing a certain protocol each time. As we collect the evidence, it gets downloaded, put into a safe spot, and then we compare it with other evidence we get later. One of the things that we do to try and corroborate, we'll back up a little bit here. We try very hard to coordinate everything, and correlate maybe is also a good word. For example, if we get a piece of evidence, what does it record on? Did we just get it? Did somebody just experience it, which really isn't evidence, but did somebody experience it at the same time? Did we get an audio tape of it? Did we videotape it? Did this piece of equipment acknowledge something and then another piece of equipment acknowledge the same thing? And we keep records of all that. We tape it. I have a person taking notes just like you would at a crime scene, an entry log and stuff like that. Who's where at what time, what is heard. We then have the video evidence. So that's how we keep it. There is not yet a repository. There's a lot of talk of it, but it's never been successfully done nationally where people can put evidence and people can share evidence, much like our NCIC type of thing, where we can share information back and forth. That just is not something that's happening, which is a sad thing as far as we're concerned. And that's how we keep it. Right now, we keep it for ourselves and we share it with others as we can. But it's all locked up. It's not accessible to anybody but me and my lockbox, actually.
Right.
So
I believe there's other retired law enforcement officers throughout the country that are doing similar work as what you're doing. Because it's interesting when you bring up the repository, where that would be a good idea of data collection and sharing. Then you've probably connected with some of those other retired law enforcement officers.
I have.
Yeah.
I have. Why haven't we done it? Mostly because of money. You got to have a place to do it. You've got to have a website with the storage that you can put the data into, and somebody's got to pay for it. And I actually tried to do that several years ago, but I just couldn't get the interest in it. See, there's two types of individuals that do this, very simply put. There's the researcher, which I would like to consider my team and I, we're researching this. We're trying to find out what the phenomenon is. And then there's what I call the thrill seekers. And there's nothing wrong with that. Why do people jump out of a perfectly good airplane with a parachute? To have a thrill. I would never do it, but people do it. So for folks to go out and experience this for the thrill of it, I get it. I don't have an issue with it. But we've got to get enough folks that are wanting to research the phenomenon that we begin to come up with a way of sharing it with each other. I go back to the homicide analogy I gave them a few minutes ago. We're going to investigate, we investigate a homicide basically the same way, wherever you are, minus some different rules and procedures, but essentially the same way. We've got to get to the point where we are doing it the same way. So when we get that repository, I get some evidence down here in Vero. You get some evidence up there in your spot in New York. And because the moon phase was the same on the two pieces of evidence, the temperature is the same in our two different spots, time of year, different things that we'll collect. Now we've got something. If you're getting a piece of evidence and the conditions are the same and it's collected essentially the same way I did, now we got something. Now we've got something we can talk about and maybe begin to put some answers to. So that's why the repository is so important. How do we get to the point, you asked this earlier, to prove that voice came from somewhere else? That's where the problem lies. We haven't got that type of equipment yet. There's no piece of equipment out there that definitively confirms the existence of. the other side. We just don't. And somebody who's much, much smarter than I'll ever be and much more technology advanced than I ever will be. We need to develop equipment that can do that. And I think we're heading that way. Whole different topic we could get on, but I think we're heading that way. But we also have to have a place to store the stuff and share it with each other so that we legitimately can see if there's any correlation between what I have here and what you have up in New York.
Right. Oh, yeah, absolutely. It does make 100% makes a lot of sense. So first responders, cops, firefighters, paramedics, combat veterans, we work in environments where we see death, violence, trauma regularly. In those fields that I mentioned, how many of them do you think have had experiences they couldn't explain and never told anyone?
Well, I would say a significant number. Now, some people say, I've never had anything happen to me. This Lawson guy's crazy. I've never had any. Well, it doesn't happen to everybody. A theory that I'm working on right now has to do with frequency and vibration, because everything vibrates. Everything's got a vibrational frequency, a tree, whatever. And I think that's where the answer is, and that comes in through radio waves also. So not everybody's going to be at the same vibrational frequency when something happens. And that's my theory, that somehow they connect for that brief moment, and that's when things happen. So not everybody's going to be there often, sometimes not at all. But I think a significant number. I've talked to enough cops to say that firefighters, doctors, ER doctors, I got a really cool ER story, in fact.
Go ahead and tell it.
Oh, okay. Well, I was doing a tour one night. It was actually in Fellsmere. This is several years ago. And I had a group of folks come in, and oftentimes in these tours, the wife wants to go or the husband wants to go, and the spouse is, all right, I'll go with you. I think it's all a bunch of BS, but I'll go. So I had this group in the old school in Fellsmere, and this is tall gentleman who just kind of very stoic, very just looking at me. And I'm thinking in my head, this guy just doesn't want to be here. He doesn't believe any of this stuff. And we go through the whole tour, and it actually was a very intriguing tour. People were interested. They're asking a lot of questions, which I like. I like it when people ask questions, and especially if they challenge me. So finally we get to the end of the tour, and this gentleman walks up to me and he goes, well, I'm a doctor, and I got my start in the ER, and I forget where in Colorado. I want to say Boulder, but I don't remember if that's the case. And he said, one night we had a guy come in, and he was cut stem to stern, and he was bleeding out. We couldn't do a thing to stop his bleeding. We called in the thoracic guy, and he came in, and he was able to stop the bleeding and save the guy. Now, the victim was out of it the whole time. He was dying. He was dying on the table, and this thoracic doctor was able to save him and bring him back. This guy then said about, some period of time later, the victim came back into the ER and said, I want to thank you guys for saving my life. Without you, I wouldn't have lived. And I want to thank that doctor, the one with funny glasses. And the guy I'm talking to kind of says, he stepped back and says, well, what guy, the guy who was working on my stomach. Well, you weren't awake when he was working on you, and you were gone, but he was gone. But when you woke up, how did you even know about him? And he said, well, I was up in the corner of the ER looking down on all of you as you were working on me. And apparently the guy was able to describe the procedure and what was being done in detail. And he said the guy couldn't have seen it because, first of all, he's on his back. He can't see what's going on in his, abdomen and things. But he was able to give absolute exquisite detail of what the doctor with the funny looking glasses did for him to save him. And he said, since that time, I've become a believer.
Yeah, that's the NDEs, the near-death experience people. And there's a lot of stories about, and I've listened to a lot of them just because I enjoy listening to them. Every one of those NDEs, it's what they see, visualize, everything that happens is almost identical. Literally almost identical. And when they're on the if it's an experience where they're in an emergency room, they all no matter if it's a surgery or some sort of heart issue or cardio issue or lung issue or whatnot, it's like this outer body experience where they actually sit above their body and they watch everything that's happening to them on the table, and all these near-death experience stories I've listened to that are in a hospital setting, all of them are almost identical in the way that things proceed.
And once again, and when somebody goes through that, you're not going to tell them it didn't happen to you because they were there and they saw it and they believe it. But this also goes back to the phenomena that we really don't understand this. And if I can take a minute to just share
Oh, yeah,
this.
go ahead.
I have my personal beliefs what it is, but until I have the evidence, I can't prove either way. But we don't know if it's the other side reaching out to us. We don't know if in the near-death experience, if it's our soul truly leaving the body. We don't know if it's a dimensional issue. I mean, there's a big talk now. This is involving the stuff with everything from UFOs to Bigfoot. Or is this a dimensions? Are we crossing over dimensions? Or is it, and this is where I'm getting at specifically with NDE, is it our own minds? Our brain is so powerful that experts have been studying it for years. They still don't have all the answers to what our brain can do. There's a guy named Uri Geller. You probably won't remember him, but back in the 70s, Uri Geller was this guy that was bending spoons all over the place. There was TV and movies written with him doing this stuff, and it never been successfully debunked, but he was bending spoons with his mind. There was an experiment in the early 70s called the Philip experiment. It was in Toronto, I believe, and they had a investigation that was closed off, but they created a guy named Philip. And in this investigation seance, if you will, they began to get Philip answering them, lifting tables, doing all kinds, and they recorded all of it. But Philip was the creation of their own mind. So was it their mind creating the phenomena? I think that's something that we need to consider in all investigations and not just immediately say it's Aunt Gertrude trying to get a hold of us. We need to keep an open mind and realize we don't understand the phenomenon. And that's where the brain thing comes in, especially with near-death experiences. I agree with you. How do they all come out the same? But I think we have to keep a focused mind on it, realize we don't know why yet. And that, my friend, is why I do this.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So this became, you went after this paranormal investigation more so after you were doing it leading up to retirement.
Yeah.
And now you're really into it. Was that, we see a lot in the first responder community. Was that kind of a way for you to use your skill set and decompress and sort of an outlet to continue doing what you enjoy?
Absolutely. And it's important to say that I use my skills as a cop in this, my skepticism, yes. So the answer to your question is yes, it has definitely created an outlet, but I was also really fortunate. And I have always had outside activities between fishing, building model airplanes, and this, I've always had an outlet that has allowed me to not become eaten up. And it's great because really, I've not been on the job since 2020. And I never, ever, ever, and I know a lot of folks out there are going to feel this way. And those of you that are heading towards retirement are going to feel this way. You can't even think a second about not doing what you're doing. But in 2020, I was able to say, yep, I've had enough. And because of my other interests, the things I had outside the job, I was able to say, okay, when I'm done, I'm done. Do I miss it still? Oh, absolutely. And I think we talked about this before. You miss the camaraderie of the guys and gals you work with. You miss what you do. I mean, right today, I still look at a license tag and wonder if it's been attached in, if somebody stole it and attached another tag on it. I look at the expiration dates on it. I see somebody with a coat on when it's hot. I'm double looking. So you never really lose it. But having these other outlets has made the transition easier. And I would encourage everybody on the job, and I don't care if you're a firefighter, paramedic, have those other interests so that when your time comes, you have an outlet. Because, yeah, that did help me a lot.
Yeah, I think I've talked to so many first responders that have retired and they didn't have something set up when they leave the job. And it's a totally different subject, but there's a lot of emotional distress that comes along when you walk out of that first responder field and you go from 1,000 miles an hour to zero, right? And you have to have something there to help you motivate you in life or an outlet or in the hobbies and keep yourself occupied. I know when my dad retired, he had things lined up already. When he walked out the door from law enforcement, he already had stuff lined up, ready to go. Kind of like you did, like you had that lined up, ready to go. And I know some cops that and first responders that do have things lined up on the side. A lot don't.
But I think it's better than it used to be.
Yes.
Back, when folks were retiring, when I came on the job, that really is all they knew. And so often guys are especially bad about this. We identify ourselves by our job.
Mhm.
That's what we are. And when we don't have it anymore, it's almost like our body shuts down. That's why so many guys back in the day, they retire and they'd be dead in 3 years, So have that outlet. I agree with you 100%.
This is a good one. For any skeptic that's listening right now, like the hard-nosed cop or veteran who thinks this is all nonsense, what do you have to say for them?
Since the beginning of mankind, people of every socioeconomic class, every educational level, country, religion, culture has experienced things. I carried a gun and badge for 40 years. I passed all my psychs. I know I'm not nuts, but I also know what I've experienced. There's something out there. We don't know why these things happen. Keep an open mind. You may not have experienced something, and that not everybody does, but there are some things that have happened that just can't be explained. So keep an open mind and realize there might be a reason for it, and just don't shove it aside. I mean, saying it doesn't exist, in my opinion, is as crazy as saying every knock on the pipe or bang on the wall is a ghost, because that's not the case either. But there is something in between. Keep an open mind. Realize that folks have experienced something, and we don't know what it is yet. But keep an open mind. That's all I ask.
For someone who has had an unexplained experience they've never told anyone about, what would you tell them?
Don't think you're crazy.
Because I think like there is people that have had these experiences and they're like, if I say anything, people are gonna think I'm nuts, right? And they hold that in.
Well, I think that was really bad when you and I first came on the job.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's like that now. I think people are the general public, and folks even in our business are a little more open to it. And I don't think that if you talk about it, you're going to be thought as crazy. But do look at the logic of it. Is there an explanation for what you experienced? If there was, or there could be, then you can pass it off to that. But if there's no explanation for it, keep an open mind and realize there are things out there we don't understand. Look at all the UFO stuff that's going on now with the
Oh,
government.
wow.
That for years people say, there's no UFOs, and maybe there's not. But look what's happening now. We've got people saying this stuff has occurred. And I guarantee you that regardless of who's listening, there is somebody that you're working with, that you trust, that you have faith in, that may have had an experience that they've never told you about because they don't want to be thought as maybe being off their rocker. But it's real to them. So just keep an open mind.
So where can listeners find your book?
Well, they can find the book. I wish I had here. Let me hold on just a second.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Do you want me to shut that sun?
No, you're fine.
Okay.
You're fine.
Right, back on. This is the book here, Haunted Indian River County. It's part of a series of books put up by the Haunted America series, the History Press. You pretty much localized. You've probably seen something similar in some of your stores there, but you can get this on Amazon. It's probably the best way for folks out of the state to get it. And it, once again, talks a lot about the history of the area. So you can get that book on Amazon. You can get a hold of me directly at ghostguy59@gmail.com. Our email, if you want to check out our Facebook site, there's Indian River Hauntings and the Florida Bureau of Paranormal Investigation. We both have Facebook sites. If you want to find our website, it's indianriverhauntings.com, indianriverhauntings.com. If you want to really see how crazy I am and you want to see some of our videos, you can find us on YouTube, the @ at Indian River Hauntings 2341, and you can just kind of see some of the things that we do online if you're interested. And I'm saying that, I'm thinking of other cool stories, but we don't have time for that.
No, it's fine. That's important information. It's good because I want the guests to check out you and what you're doing. Lastly, I like asking the guests this question is, you as a retired law enforcement officer, you started way back, but what advice for any law enforcement officers that are just coming in this career field right now, what would be one of the biggest things you would say to a new person that's green, that's just walking in to this career field, what would you say to them in today's society?
Well, today's society in particular, but any society, and I had this conversation, I would say this a lot as the academy director. Come into the business for the right reason. This job is not about you, not how cool you look in uniform, not how fast you can drive in a car, but come into this business because you want to serve others. You want to protect others. It's okay to get the adrenaline rush. It's okay to enjoy it, but make sure you're coming into this for the right reason, and that's service to others. Have that belief in service to others. It's not about you. It's not about how much money you're going to make. You do got to take that in consideration, but it's about others and it's about service. And come into it with that servant attitude, and you will be happy and you will be successful. The minute you start thinking about you, you lose that.
It's funny you mentioned the money part, because I've seen throughout my career, and I'm sure it's still happening in all states, where you could be working for a really great law enforcement agency, right? And it may not pay, it might not be the top tier bracket of pay that you want, but you come to work and you do your job, and the bosses are happy and everything. But then you get this opportunity to transfer a lateral to an agency that may pay $20,000 to $30,000 more a year, or $10,000 more a year. And I've seen so many police officers make that jump, right, from a place that they were content and happy with, just to make that money, and they get over to that new agency and they're miserable. Yeah, so always take that into consideration before you make the jump and make the move, because the grass is not always greener on the other side, and there's other ways to supplement your income if you feel that money is that big of an issue, but like I saw it so many times, and you check on that guy or gal when 3-4 months down the road, when they're at that new agency, and you're so how's it going? And it's just, they're in a shit show.
Yeah, exactly. And another thing I would tell a rookie too is find a department, police department, law enforcement agency that fits your personality. Don't go there because you like their cars. Don't go there because their badge is cooler than the rest. Find the agency that fits your personality. For example, if you're an individual that likes to be out in the wilderness and on your own, maybe you're best off as a wildlife officer. Or you just like the inner city, maybe whatever your personality is, find the agency that fits your personality and stay there, even if the pay isn't as high as some of the others, because job happiness is half the battle with us.
Well, yeah, you have to be happy in any first responder career field, especially law enforcement. You need to be happy at what you're doing, because it's going to lead to burnout. It's going to bleed your marriage. It's going to bleed your relationships. You're not going to be happy. You got to be happy at what you do and happy at what you're doing. But anyway, Larry, I appreciate you coming on the show, taking this time early in the morning on a Wednesday. And thank you for sharing your stories and coming on the Blue Line Voice, Blood, Smoke, and Sand. And if you would, just hang out there for a minute, and I'll be right with you.
All right. Thank you.